Good evening and welcome. It's now 6 o'clock. I'm handing over to Dr. Tlali. Thank you.
Good evening, colleagues. My name is Dr. Tsipile Tlali. I'm the Vice Chairperson of the South African Registrars Association, popularly known as SARA. Tonight, I have the privilege to facilitate this session, and I trust that you are all well in this chilly weather. So why are we doing this MMED mastery session? As I'm sure you may have read in the poster for this webinar, we conducted a survey last year amongst registrars from various universities to assess whether they need research support for the MMEDs. The findings reveal that there are quite a myriad of needs within registrars. Some registrars struggling to find research topics. Others are stuck in ethics approval. Others are struggling with data analysis. And finally, publication of their research. Recognizing these challenges, we aim to assist registrars in completing their MMEDs within the allocated 4 years. Through a series of webinars. The series will provide tailored support to address varying research readiness levels amongst registrars. This tonight is our third installment in the MMED Mastery webinar series. The first two were about choosing a research topic and basic research methodologies. If you missed these webinars, or any webinar from SARA for that matter, SAMA for that matter, they are available on the SAMA YouTube channel, which is professionally named the South African Medical Association. So please don't just type SAMA, you might struggle to find it. And our next webinar should be next week on the 11th of June, but this is to be confirmed. And that one will be talking about preparing your submission manuscript. So it's also quite a vital topic. Back to today. Our webinar today is about getting ready for ethics approval, and it will be presented by Professor Ames Dye. This step has a reputation for being quite challenging. I know there are people who can be stuck on ethics approval for a year or even more. Hopefully, by the end of the webinar, we will leave with information that at least alleviates this process. Before I introduce Prof. Dye, I would like to just give a couple of house rules. Please feel free to ask questions as we go along. Use the chat function under the Q&A, and these questions will be answered after the presentation. Secondly, SARA is preparing a writing retreat. For that, please kindly complete the survey in the chat. This will help us identify topics to cover at the retreat and enable us to plan accordingly. The dates for this retreat will be announced later. Right, so about Prof. Dye. Professor Ames Dye is the founder and past director of the Steve Biko Center of Bioethics at the Wits University Faculty of Health Science, for which she was active between the years 2007 and 2019. She is a professor of bioethics and health law at the Wits School of Clinical Medicine and a member of the Academy of Science of South Africa. She is the immediate past chairperson of the UNESCO International Bioethics Committee. Some of her current activities include being the chairperson of the SAMRC Bioethics Advisory Panel, the chair of the Human Sciences Research Council for Research Ethics Committee, the chair of the SANBS Research Ethics Committee, the chair of the the Academy of Science of South Africa, Biosafety and Biosecurity Committee, and a board member of SAMA. Her past roles include being a vice chairperson on the Ministerial Advisory Committee for COVID-19 vaccines, where she headed the technical working group on the mandatory vaccinations. 2 terms as the deputy chair of the National Health Research Ethics Council and a member of the board of the HPCSA. Prof. Dye is a leading authority in the bioethics, both internationally and locally, and can be credited with entrenching bioethics and human rights as an integral aspect of health sciences. So when it comes to talking about ethics and research ethics, I can't think of a better person to give us this talk. So please welcome Prof. Dai to give us our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shali, for the introduction. I'm going to share screen now. Okay, I think I've got that going. And let's get on to the slideshow. Right, I think I'm on the slideshow. Okay, so I want to thank all of you for attending this conference, this webinar, and also want to thank SARA for actually putting so much into preparing our registrars for their research component of their training. It's an extremely, extremely cold Johannesburg, and it's good evening, everyone, from an extremely cold Johannesburg as well. So the topic here is getting ready for ethics approval. Ethics approval for many can be very daunting. Having been involved in research ethics committee functioning since 2000, I'm going to take you into the mind of a research ethics committee member, and I'm going to try to get you to understand how we actually do our ethics approvals. So by way of outline, I'll introduce you to some of the concepts that we engage with when doing the ethics approval. I'll look at why we need research ethics. I'll take you through some of the pertinent international and local instruments that we use as research ethics committee members when we review the ethics of your research. I'll leave you with some norms and standards to assist you when you're putting together your protocol. And I'll also end up with a slide of some common problems that we see on, on the Research Ethics Committee. And these are very low-hanging fruit that you can address straight away. So what I would like for you to have at the end of this session is an awareness through action and writing of the ethical and legal responsibilities involved in research participant protections, research conduct and reporting, and the research ethics review process. And I do hope that you will have some competence in trying to incorporate ethics into research methodology. It's very important not to see ethics as an appendage after you've done your research, put together your research methodology. It's important to actually make it part and parcel of the process when you're putting together your methodology. I want to start off with what the philosopher Leon Kass has said. And I think this rings very true for us in research ethics. The benefits of biomedical progress are obvious, clear, and powerful. And we all are aware of these benefits, but the hazards are much less well appreciated. And research ethics reminds us of the hazards and how to approach these hazards. And why do we need ethics? It's very simple. We need ethics in all walks of life. Ethics basically assists us on how we ought to be acting in a given situation, and it provides us strong reasons for doing so. What does ethics involve? It involves a critical reflection of morality, and terms that we use in morality are things like good and bad, virtue and evil, etc. But so what ethics does is it does a systematic reflection and a systematic analysis of the situation on hand to assist us with how we reach to those terms in morality, the good or the bad. The intention of ethics is to safeguard human dignity, promote justice, equality, truth, and trust. And in research, health research specifically, ethics is about protecting vulnerable participants against harms. There are many challenges in research, health research. But I think all these challenges can actually, not can, but all of them hinge around this one question. And the one question is whether the demands and goals of science and health research can be pursued with full protections of the rights and dignity of the research participant and research communities. And this dilemma that we sit with is intensified even further when we look at the goals of science and the outcomes of science, and it's usually the promoting the well-being of individuals and society at large. And how do you then balance this utility of research with protecting people against harms as they participate in the process and give of themselves towards the well-being of society? And we know that there have been many atrocities in research, both globally and also within our African continent and also within our country as well. So what are the components of ethics in research? And specifically from the Research Ethics Committee perspective, we have two components, the regulatory and the ethical. They overlap quite a bit, but I'm going to take you through the two components. The regulatory component basically is the need for doing that research ethics review. What are the regulations behind it? And the ethical component is how do we use ethics to actually reflect on the research methods and ensure that what we are sitting with in front of us is actually ethical and can be approved. So when it comes to the regulatory component, we have international instruments and guidelines, and we have local instruments and guidelines. And you can see the list here in terms of the international instruments that we use. The most important for us from the perspective of the Research Ethics Committee is the World Medical Association Declaration of Helsinki. It gets updated every few years, every 5 to 6 years. And this is because science and technology are actually, advancing at a very rapid rate. And because of these advances, we have to update our ethics documents to ensure that we keep up. Our ethics is also current. And the World Medical Association Declaration of Helsinki itself is currently undergoing revision. So if you're planning to submit your project towards the end of the year, just check which is, just look for the latest version, because it's not going to be 2013, but by October, we will have a 2024 version. A very, very, very good document to use is the Council of International Organization of Medical Scientists, the CIOMS guidelines. And what CIOMS does is it actually takes the principles and the norms and standards from the Declaration of Helsinki and gives commentary and does a systematic analysis in that commentary with regard to how you actually get to that principle. And in that commentary gives a lot of guidance. It's really very relevant for us because there's a lot of focus on lower and middle income countries and the protections that are required in the LMICs. If you're doing clinical trials, you need to be in compliant with the ICH GCP guidelines. If you are going to be doing a project that entails using data, which you acquire from human databases, you would need to actually know what's in the Declaration of Taipei and the guidance given in the Declaration of Taipei. Or if you're going to be using stored specimens, and this is all minimal risk research, but if you use stored specimens, you need to actually also use the Declaration of Taipei for how you address or how you manage ethically the use of specimens from human biological materials from biobanks. Now, what I'm going to recommend that you do is download the Declaration of Helsinki, the CIOMS guidelines, and the Declaration of Taipei. You need that as your resource materials. Now, what are our South African instruments and guidelines? We start with the Bill of Rights of the Constitution, which actually has a stipulation on research and experimentation. No other constitution in the world carries something like that, which our South African Constitution has. We have stipulations, so we move from the Constitution, we go into an Acts of Parliament, and most important are stipulations from the National Health Act and the Protection of Personal Information Act, the POPIA. And the National Health Act basically forms that governance structure for us in research. And if you are going to, I think what you need to do is, if you download the National Health Act, look specifically at Chapter 8 and 9. Chapter 9 is specific to research, but Chapter 8 also looks at human tissues, in case you're going to be using human tissue for research. We have our own GCP guidelines in South Africa, 3rd edition 2020. We also have our National Health Research Ethics Committee guideline documents. Now, that's that document against which Research Ethics Committee members in this country actually review research. And this document is called Ethics in Health Research, Principles, Processes, and Structures. And the latest guideline, just uploaded on Friday on the Department of Health website, the 2024 guidelines is the guideline that you would need to get. And of course, we all registered with Health Professions Council, and it has its own set of guidelines, which are very much in sync with the National Health Research Ethics Council guidance documents. And however, it's important for you to understand that if there is an issue and an erosion of ethical conduct in research, you can get reported not only to the National Health Research Ethics Council, but also to the Health Professions Council. And if at preliminary committee of inquiry, it is found that there are concerns, you go in for a full inquiry. And based on the full inquiry, you could be found not guilty of anything, or you, if found guilty, there's a range of sanctions from, a caution or warning, right through to suspension, or even a fine. And depending on how bad that situation is in terms of ethical compromise, you could also be, taken off the register. So ethics in health research is taken very seriously. At research ethics committees, we actually aware of all these issues. And when we ask the questions and we do not give the clearance unless we're satisfied, it's basically to protect you, the researcher, more than to protect ourselves as research ethics committees. So looking at the Bill of Rights of the Constitution, it highlights good old informed consent. So section 12(2), everyone has the right to bodily and psychological integrity, which includes the right not to be subjected to medical or scientific experiments without informed consent. So, and oftentimes we get stuck at how we approach the informed consent. And it's a low-hanging fruit. It's easy to do that informed consent. There are other applicable rights that you can see highlighted here in the Constitution. And when you are judged in terms of how you approach the ethics, are there any constitutional breaches? You're going to be judged on all these sections as well. Health research is defined in the National Health Act. And it's any research which contributes to all these activities that you see are highlighted here. I think it's about 8 bullet points. And when you read these activities, you realize how broad health research is in terms of its definition. So any activity that falls under this definition must be reviewed and given clearance by a registered health research ethics committee. And our health research ethics committees are registered with the National Health Research Ethics Council. We get audited every 3 to 4 years, and there are certain standards against which we have to comply with, and which actually stipulates what our governance processes are. And you can see here the National Health Act in section 73 makes it mandatory that institutions where health research is being conducted must have access to a health research ethics committee. And it also gives you guidance on what a research ethics committee actually needs to do. Now, here's our guideline document from the National Health Research Ethics Council, just been uploaded on Friday. And this document is a must for you as you are preparing your protocol. So basically, very, very important. I've pulled out some things for you from here. And in terms of this document, it stipulates that your primary responsibility as a researcher is to ensure the safety and well-being of your research participants, to ensure the scientific integrity of your protocol, and to ensure responsible implementation of the protocol. And so this document then makes it necessary for us as research ethics committee members to also look at the science of your protocol. You know, we often have researchers come to us and say, but why are you asking the scientific questions? That's not your mandate. Your mandate is the ethical issues. But if science is not good, or if science is questionable, then you probably would be exposing participants to risks and harms for outcomes that you may not be able to implement. So we work from the premise that poor science is ipsi facto unethical, and therefore research ethics committees also look at the science of the research. Another issue that I will highlight to you is when it comes to competence, it's not only scientific competence, but it's research ethics competence as well. And what our guidelines stipulate is that researchers, when applying to the Research Ethics Committee, need to produce evidence of appropriate research ethics training within the previous 3 years. And I'm saying this because oftentimes what happens is we have applications coming through, but the researchers are not aware that they have to give us, with this application, evidence of the research ethics training. And that's a low-hanging fruit. But if you don't send it through, it takes longer for you to actually get your approval. What now are the ethics components? How do we actually apply the ethics when we review your protocols? We basically use principle-based ethics because they're the easiest to use, and they cover most issues in terms of ethics applications. So, you know, I'm not going to take you through philosophy and theories, etc. But let's just stick to the principles. And I'm sure all of you at this stage are familiar with these 4 principles. When we look at autonomy, basically autonomy covers or forms the basis of informed consent and also of confidentiality. In terms of beneficence, we look at the benefits that come out of the research, and non-maleficence is the risks and harms. And we usually read beneficence and non-maleficence together when we say the benefits of the research must outweigh the risks and harms of research. And then, of course, there's the justice component, where if you involve people in research, you enroll them in research, you need to compensate them. Should, you know, it should they give off their time? Should they travel to you? So there's transport costs, etc. So you need to compensate them appropriately. The National Health Research Ethics Council uses the TIE method. So the TIE, T-I-E, is time, inconvenience, and expenses. So you need to compensate them for time, inconvenience, and expenses. Then, if your research participant is injured as a result of participating in the research, you need to also include how you're going to compensate them for a research-related injury. And then there's the standards of care. You need to have, if you're doing research and it's maybe international collaborative research, the standards of care in our context must be the same as in other contexts. And if there's anything that comes out of the research that would be of value to your participants, you need to look at how they can have access to this post-trial access. So just to go into informed consent and autonomy, because we find that that's where many of our researchers actually slip up. Basically, it boils down to looking at your participants as autonomous agents that can hold views, that can make choices, and that should be taking actions based on their values and beliefs. It extends as far as respecting them adequately, that where necessary, your participants are assisted in developing the ability to competently make these autonomous choices. And this is where your informed consent process comes in. Informed consent is not just that signature on a piece of paper at the time of enrollment. It involves applying ourselves to what we impart with our prospective or potential participants during the recruitment process, what we include in the participant information leaflet, and how we actually present the informed consent document itself. Now, there's philosophical and legal basis for informed consent, but just to tell you that in terms of the legal basis, it's built within our national legal system. So if you look at the National Health Act, Chapter 9, stipulates that anyone enrolled in research must make an informed choice and sign an informed consent. So there's got to be written consent. It does not make an allowance for verbal consent. We also have consent as an outcome of litigation, and this is precedent law. And so the legal basis, you can see, comes out quite strongly. I just want to remind us of the elements that form a valid consent. Use this in the practice of medicine, and same thing applies in research. So the 4 elements are disclosure, understanding and appreciation, capacity, and voluntariness. What does disclosure mean in the research context? We need to declare our conflicts of interest upfront. So if we're doing this research as part of a postgraduate program, and in your case, it would be your MMED, a master's, you need to, when you write out the greeting for your participant, you also introduce yourself and you state to them that you are doing this project as part of your master's training. They need to know. So that is declaring your conflicts right up front to your potential participant. We also need to give to them in lay language, and it's usually grade 8, your methods. So what exactly does your research entail? So a short summary of that research. You need to also include the risks, the benefits. You need to inform them that if they don't want to actually participate, it's okay. It's not going to be held against them. And should they start participation, they can withdraw at any time. That's also okay. And this would be without prejudice. Oftentimes, well, depending on whether there's potential for harms in research, and which would require treatment, you would need to actually spell that up front as well. In addition, what you would need to do is include in your patient information leaflet contact details. Should they be aggrieved and would want to know what their rights as research participants are, you give them the contact details of your research ethics committee. Should they need to know anything further with regard to the research itself, you give them your number, your contact details as well. If you're having an interview, you need to tell them how long that interview is going to take and briefly explain what that interview is about. So that's just basically disclosure. You also need to ensure that they understand what you have been trying to explain to them. And not only do they understand, but they have a cognitive appreciation of this as well. There's got to be capacity to consent. And in research, we look at mental and legal capacity. Legal capacity is basically the age of consent. And in terms of our National Health Act, the age of consent for research is 18. So anyone under the age of 18 will need to get parent or legal guardian consent. It makes it a bit difficult because there are certain research projects where you would include the older adolescent. These are sensitive types of research, maybe HIV-related research, or if you're doing something in obstetrics or gynae, it may be something to do with abortions. You would have to think about whether it's appropriate to do this research, because there could be a problem. You would need to actually get the consent of the parent or guardian. Now, I just want to explain to you that ethics rises above the law, right? So, and we can never, we have the National Health Act, but it shouldn't allow us to accept anything that interferes with ethics. And where this research is absolutely essential, these are vulnerable groups, where this research is absolutely essential, and we need to use, for example, we need to do this research in older adolescents, and we cannot get their families involved, we cannot get their guardians or their parents involved. This is where you negotiate with your research ethics committee and ask for a waiver of parent or guardian consent. And usually, depending on the motivation, you will find the research ethics committee allows for it. In fact, our NEREC guidelines have realized, the NEREC itself have realized the difficulties that we sit with in terms of enrolling the under 18s. And those guidelines also are very sympathetic towards getting this waiver. And then voluntariness. Important for us to make sure that there isn't any coercion to participate in this research. And coercion can be overt or covert. Assuming you're doing some research in the elderly, you may find the family pushing the participant to either participate or not to participate. And I think it's important to realize you may be elderly, but you're not necessarily senile. And you may be elderly, but you will still, in all probability, have that capacity to make an informed decision. When we're looking at capacity as well, and I've talked about mental capacity, it's not only mental capacity, not only is specific to the Mental Health Care Act, where you could have a proxy to come in and give you the consent. It also has to do with the frame of mind. And oftentimes you have minimal risk research. For example, you may have checking of blood pressures in the labor ward situation. Checking blood pressure, that's minimal risk research. But you find that our researchers want to actually take a consent in labor ward itself. Now, for those of you that have had children, you know that even in the latent phase of labor, you are so anxious, you can't really make a proper decision. So if you can, try to get this consent during the antenatal period, rather have consent during the antenatal period, and when the patient comes in labor, reinforce that consent. We have our researchers coming back to us and saying, but we don't see the patients during the antenatal period. They actually come in as, directly into labor ward, and we can't turn them away. And in that case, you can use the deferred consent approach, where so long as it's minimal risk research, and this is what you registrars should be doing, is minimal risk research. Where there's minimal risk research, you negotiate with your research ethics committee to actually go ahead and do that research. And when the participant or the patient is in a better frame of mind, and that's usually just before she can be discharged, you go in and you explain what the research involved, what you did, and then give the potential participant the chance to agree that you use the data or to disagree. So they make that decision at that stage. This process is called deferred consent. So we've talked of beneficence, and basically, how do we look at benefits? Basically, it's would the benefits of the research promote or contribute to the welfare of individuals or communities? And when you're unpacking the benefits, you take into account the needs, values, priorities, and cultural experiences of your potential participants. And you may need to consult with individuals and communities as you try to determine what the benefits are. When it comes to harms and risks, a harm is defined as that which adversely affects the interest or welfare of an individual or group. Now, we in the medical sphere only consider physical harm, but please remember, harm could also be discomfort, anxiety, pain. It could be psychological disturbance. And it also includes putting someone at social disadvantage. And what do I mean by all this? You may find that you're doing some research, simple questionnaire-based research in psychiatry, and you trying to unpack something about depression, and you look at the causes, or alternatively gender-based violence. And I've seen this gender-based violence or abuse, woman abuse in the antenatal period, and look to see how that could be linked with complications like a rupture. Now, we ask very sensitive questions, and what happens is this can re-trigger the original psychological disturbances, and you will have to recognize this, and you will have to try to get assistance for the individual immediately in terms of counseling. Oftentimes, if there is going to be research in the men that could result in some psychological issues, we do ask for a distress protocol. What do I mean by placing a person at social disadvantage? Sometimes we do what we think is innocuous HIV research, or again, research with regard to gender-based violence. And what happens is being involved in this type of research could result in stigma. It could result in stereotyping. We need to actually recognize this. If we have all these risks, should we go ahead with the research? Yes, if it is an important research question, we go ahead with the research, but we bring in conditions, and we bring in strategies to safeguard our participants and to assist them through all this. Now, when we look at risk, it's defined as the magnitude of a harm and the probability of its occurrence. And we can have minimal risk and more than minimal risk research, the two categories. So minimal risk is where the harm experienced will not be greater than those ordinarily encountered in daily life. And in the medical situation, minimal risk, for example, if you want to check what the blood pressures of individuals are. In the clinics, we do blood pressures all the time. If so that would be minimal risk. If you're in a diabetic clinic and you want to do finger prick blood sugars, or you want to do urine tests, etc., this is done routinely. And so this would be minimal risk. Anything that's not done routinely will then fall into the category of more than minimal risk. This slide just looks at harms, the need for us to take into justice considerations. And it's a principle in the Declaration of Helsinki, which states that there has to be appropriate compensation and treatment for subjects who are harmed as a result of participating. So in terms of justice, there's an ethical obligation for us to treat each person, each research participant in accordance with what is right and proper. And basically, our studies that we do should leave our participants and communities better off, or at least no worse off. I've mentioned vulnerability. I'll draw from the Declaration of Helsinki on this, which states that some groups and individuals are particularly vulnerable and may have an increased likelihood of being wronged or of incurring additional harm. And let's use that example of the pregnant or of the woman in labor, or a participant in the psychiatry context. They are particularly vulnerable, and they have this increased likelihood of incurring additional harm, and they have to receive specifically considered protection. And we can only do medical research in a vulnerable group if it is necessary for their health needs and priorities. And this research can't be carried out with a non-vulnerable group. So some norms and standards for you. When you're doing your research, as you put together your protocol, ask the ethical question. What is this research question? How relevant is it in terms of the patients or future patients in our context? So in other words, does it have social value? If it doesn't have social value, forget it. Please go and get another research question. If it satisfies social value, then you move into your science. You've got to ensure that there is scientific integrity to your research. Your research methodology must be immaculate. You will have to engage with people. If you're doing some research in a clinic, you need to engage with your clinic management or clinic sisters or the staff to see whether it's feasible to do the research there. If you have concerns about your research project and you're really scratching your head in terms of the ethics, engage with your research ethics committee. They're all role players to assist you with your research. Very important is fair selection of participants. Be strict about your inclusion and exclusion criteria. Don't just go for participants because they can't protect themselves. They're vulnerable and they're an easily accessible group. No. There must be strict inclusion, exclusion criteria. I've talked to you about risks and benefits. I've talked to you about informed consent. There's got to be ongoing respect for participants, including their privacy and confidentiality has to be respected at all stages. And of course, you've got to be competent as a researcher. So what are some of our common problems? Low-hanging fruit here. We find that application forms come in, they're not completely filled. And so it goes back to say you haven't filled in section 2 or you haven't filled in section 4. The thing is, remember, our research ethics application forms are generic forms that cover a range of research. And some aspects of the form may not apply to your particular research. It doesn't mean you leave it empty. If it's not applicable, fill in that it's not applicable, but don't leave it incompletely filled in. Oftentimes we see scientific flaws. Now, what happens is with your MMED research, you've got to go through the scientific process as well. And now and then we find that researchers will submit to cut time. They will submit in parallel to Research Ethics Committee and to their scientific committee. In some institutions called their postgraduate scientific committee, various names at different institutions. I'm going to recommend that it undergoes scientific scrutiny before it comes to us at the Research Ethics Committee. Otherwise, it just delays processes. When it comes to informed consent, important for us to look at that patient information, the participant information leaflet. Many institutions have templates. Your research ethics committees have templates for you to follow. And what happens is the researchers will just thumbsuck how to do it and send us really, a totally unsatisfactory participant information leaflet. Don't forget the frame of mind as well when you're putting together your informed consent. Privacy is so important. So where are you going to enroll your participant? Are you going to do it in the ward in front of everyone, or at the clinic in the queue in front of everyone? No, you need to find a private space where you actually do the enrollment so you can have a good heart-to-heart chat with your potential participant. If you're doing interviews, find a private space as well. But very, very important, if you have patients waiting in queues and you pull them out of a queue to go to this private space for enrollment or for interview, think about what's going to happen when the patient comes back. The patient will lose his or her place in the queue. So you negotiate with the nursing staff to get the patient in as soon as possible after the enrollment or the interview, or to keep that place in the queue. And so the patient doesn't lose the place in the queue. Look, these are simple things that we look at, but they're really important for the participants. Think very carefully about your risk. Try to go for minimal risk research. If you can go for retrospective reviews of data, that's actually for, I would suggest something that you go for in terms of your project. Don't forget social harms and psychological harms. And if there's a need for you to actually link in with a counselor, you may have to do that. Of course, I've talked about social work. Remember that. Don't forget to submit your proof of research ethics training, or if you're doing a clinical trial, you'll also need a GCP certificate as well. What is really helpful, which researchers, not only registrars, but generally researchers forget to do, is send through a cover letter, which explains succinctly what the research is about and what they think the ethical issues are, and how they've actually tried to address the ethical issues. It could just be a one-pager, but it's always good to have a cover letter as well. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
Thank you so much, Professor Dai. That was a brilliant background into research, as well as the tips into the challenges that are faced in applying for ethics, as well as implementing the ethics protocols for their research. We only have one question in the Q&As, and that question comes from Professor Chitnis, which states that last year, the ethics committee at Walter Sisulu University was disbanded for many months due to non-compliance. Their registrars suffered a lot as they couldn't get help from any other university. He sincerely hopes that it does not happen again. If it does happen, he'd like to know if there are options or solutions to help their registrars.
It's sad that that sort of situation arose and disadvantaged the registrars. I think if that happens again, come directly to SAMA. SAMA has an Education, Science and Technology Committee, and this set of webinars is basically due to discussions from that committee as well, together with SARA, and it shouldn't happen. One of the things that I'm going to tell you is that SAMA leadership is in discussion with Walter Sisulu to support the registrars and to support the staff as well, and to support the researchers. So should you see there's problems with your research ethics committee, come straight off to SAMA. Come immediately to SAMA and we'll see how we can assist. Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor Dai. Yeah, I see Professor Chitnis also sends his appreciation. I think in the absence of any other questions, I would like to just thank everybody, especially you, Professor Dai, for taking the time to attend our webinar. It was quite insightful and very helpful. I think personally, I'd very much like also to just watch it again on YouTube, because there was quite a lot of information that I would like to absorb from there, and I would think that a lot of people would also think the same. Just a reminder about the MMED survey, the retreat, the research retreat survey, which is in the chat. Please could you kindly fill it in? Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy your evening and stay warm.
Thank you. Before you go off, Chair, what I'd like to say is that I am available. Research ethics is my passion. So should registrars need any assistance whatsoever, I am an email away, a phone call away. Contact me through the SAMA offices and I will be happy to assist.
Thank you so much for that, Prof. Dai. I think one of the easiest ways is maybe if they contact us, contact you through us, and maybe we can also have a sort of a database to make sure that they are carried through and helped through all the way with a research.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you.